Many readers of the Bible feel perplexed that the book of Jonah ends with God's final question in 4:11. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? Where is Jonah's answer? What happened to him in the end? Was the hatred for Nineveh that remained in his heart resolved, or did he understand God's heart and change? Why did the book of Jonah not write a conclusion? This is not a flaw in the text. It signifies that another theological message is hidden within. I intend to reflect on this silence in the book of Jonah. Reading from the place of the victim. To understand this ending, we must first reconsider the book's protagonist and its audience. Jonah is not simply a narrow-minded and disobedient prophet. He is a prophet who, having heard of or witnessed the cruel atrocities of the Assyrian Empire, foresees his homeland's destruction. His anger is not simple bigotry. It is the result of his conflict and agony in the face of imperialistic violence. How can a righteous God offer a path of salvation to perpetrators of such cruel evil? Even more important are the book's first readers. If, as scholars presume, the book's audience was the Jewish community during or just after the Babylonian exile, they were victims who shared Jonah's exact sentiments. In the heart of the empire, Babylon, that had destroyed their nation and burned their temple, they would have read Jonah's dilemma as their own. Rejecting cheap grace. If a Jonah 5 existed, ending with, "And so Jonah understood God's deep will and ran to Nineveh to rejoice with them," what message would that have sent to the exiled readers? It would have been seen as a rigid dogmatism that ignores their pain and trauma, emphasizing only doctrine or morals. Indeed, many Christians misunderstand God as a rigid dogmatist. When they read the Bible, they are always looking for the correct answer, and they often show a frustrating tendency to just state that answer while ignoring the conflict and pain of others. Hannah Arendt, a Jewish philosopher who was interned in a Nazi camp as a young woman and dramatically rescued, confessed how difficult forgiveness is. She said that in the face of irreversible crimes like the Holocaust, forgiveness died in the concentration camps. For a victim to forgive a perpetrator is a matter that transcends the human realm. Just as Job raged against his friends who tried to explain his suffering, a premature demand for reconciliation is a secondary assault on the victim. Furthermore, to easily express sympathy or to say, "I understand," about a pain one has not experienced is also another form of assault on the victim. The person is far more important than principles, rules, morals, or doctrine. Above all, the restoration of the person who has been harmed is what matters.
Not coercion, but an invitation. God's method of questioning. God knows this. That is why throughout Jonah 4, God debates with Jonah, but does not coerce him. God does not condemn Jonah's anger or ignore his feelings. Instead, he prepares a plant to shade Jonah, and then uses a worm and a hot east wind to touch his feelings directly. And at the final moment, God throws a question, not a command or a declaration. This connects to the miracle of forgiveness that, as theologian Miroslav Volf says in Exclusion and Embrace, only happens within a structure of suffering and care. God does not force Jonah, saying, "You must love Nineveh." Instead, he says, "You cared about this insignificant plant. How much more should I?" This is an invitation that says, will you not try to expand that small feeling of compassion you have to understand my compassion? God uses Jonah's feelings, both his anger at Nineveh and his compassion for the plant, not as an object of condemnation, but as the only channel through which he can understand God's heart. The cross and restorative justice. It is at this point that we see God's bigger picture, which moves beyond retributive justice to restorative justice. What Jonah wanted was retributive justice, corresponding to a serious sin, that is, destruction. But God goes beyond punishing the perpetrator. He enacts restorative justice, which heals the broken relationship. The grace of the cross is directly connected to this restorative justice. The cross is the one event that achieved both retribution and restoration simultaneously. It is the place where all the world's sin, violence, and suffering of victims, the objects of retribution, reached their peak, and at the same time it is the site of costly forgiveness, restoration, where God Himself endured it all, sacrifice, to heal the broken relationship. The book of Jonah shows this very logic of the cross in Old Testament language. God does not condemn Jonah's trauma and anger, saying, "That is sin, so cast it away." Rather, He embraces him as a core subject of restorative justice. To God, the spiritual restoration of the victim, Jonah, who was trapped in a hell of hatred, may have been just as important as the repentance of the perpetrator, Nineveh, the mission. This is because only a restored victim can stand in a place to understand, even if just a little, God's compassion for the enemy. Conclusion: the long-suffering passed on to the reader. The open ending of Jonah does not tell us if Jonah responded to this invitation. The silence is intentional. It is God's personal consideration, waiting for Jonah's choice. God did not want a prophet who obeys through coercion, but one person who, through a painful process, comes to resemble God's heart. In the end, God's final question does not stop with Jonah. It passes over him to the book's readers in Babylonian exile, and to us today, who stand in the place of the victim. I know your pain and anger, but are you prepared to break the framework of your righteous anger and understand my heart, which cares even for your enemy? Answering this question was Jonah's task, and it is our task. The silence of Jonah is not God's failure. It is a holy space where God's long-suffering abides, waiting for a human, agonizing between mercy and justice, to break free from the shackles of hatred and respond. Please consider subscribing and supporting Logos Community in our mission to spread the gospel. Thank you.